Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ag Innovation News Podcast, presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. I'm Dan Scogan, your host for the Ag Innovation News Podcast. A reminder that guests on the Ag Innovation News Podcast shed light on innovations in value-added agriculture, highlight important voices and work that's being done throughout the Minnesota ag sector, and educate the public about resources and organizations that support Minnesota agriculture. Today, we welcome to the Ag Innovation News Podcast, Leah Thiele. She is Director of the Rural Business Investment Program, or the RBIP, at Compeer Financial. Leah will be discussing that company's program. And Leah, we want to welcome you to the Ag Innovation News Podcast today and start us off with a little background information about yourself and your work at Compeer.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks so much for having me. I love being able to talk about what I do because I absolutely love my company and what we're trying to accomplish as Compeer. I've been there for about 7 years, and I've spent most of that time in the food and agribusiness department. And recently, as of last year, Compeer really wanted to focus their efforts on rural vitality. So I stepped into that department as the Director of Rural Business Investment Program. And so that means that I manage our equity investments as a limited partner in funds that are licensed by the USDA to provide equity financing or funding to rural companies. Some pretty strict regulations. We only invest in these licensed funds, but that's the work I've been doing for a few years now. It's just more focused now that we're in a rural vitality section of the business. I live in southern Minnesota with my husband and 2 little boys. Not only did I take on this new role at Compeer this year, but we also moved to a tiny town that isn't big enough to have a population. I farm with my in-laws, and that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
So you work in ag, live in ag, you have an ag background, and you feel right at home with all of that.
Absolutely, I do.
When I went online to do a little background work here, I found reference to the RBIP and the RBIC. For our listeners, if we're going to reference those today, a little background on what that means.
The RBIP is the Rural Business Investment Program. It is a USDA program that started, let's call it 14 years ago is when we had our first fund close, and Compeer was part of that initiative to get that started. These are equity investment managers that choose to go through a long, lengthy legal process to apply to be a licensed fund. And if they go through that process, they are considered an RBIC, a Rural Business Investment Company. So we're invested in, I think, 16 funds today. It is my job to manage these investments and relationships. And about a third of these investments are in, let's call the venture space, venture growth, maybe seed stage a little bit. And so that's how I got started really connecting with different ag entrepreneurs, ag tech companies, and just found kind of a gap in that market of bringing really awesome, cool new technology from concept, initial sales, all the way to where it would fit in our food and agribusiness portfolio that I've been living and breathing in the last 5 years.
Leah, help me understand and make sure that I'm tracking right so that our listeners can as well. When you say you're managing these funds, does that mean you're trying to grow them, or you're involved in the process of investing in agribusinesses that are looking for funding, or a little bit of both?
So unfortunately, my job's not quite that much fun. I don't get to be directly involved with the agribusinesses that are being invested in. My role, I'd say it's a relationship manager role with the funds that are licensed. So my job is to connect with those funds. They usually have a 10-year life. And so I'm at annual meetings, quarterly calls. I get to know these managers really well, but they're the ones doing the investing work. They go out, they're traveling the country to most remote parts of Washington or South Carolina to find really amazing entrepreneurial businesses to invest in. Not only do I manage our relationships with those investors, my job is also to find new ones that want to do the same thing, but I'm not the one actively managing the invested companies.
Let's go back to Compeer for a moment. How large an area does Compeer serve?
We have a territory, a very specific territory as part of the farm credit system. Each of us has counties that we serve, and each county in the U.S. is covered by a farm credit. We serve 144 counties in, let's call it the eastern half of Minnesota, 2/3 of Wisconsin, and the northern half of Illinois.
And you're investing in rural communities, which really means you're investing in rural businesses. Is that significant for them?
Absolutely. It's been significant since we were started as Compeer. And of course, as our legacy associations before 2017 when we had our merger into Compeer. But day one, it was our mission to support rural America. That has always been our mission, to support agriculture and rural America. It's part of why we were one of the founding members of the very first rural business investment company, and why we've done as much as we can to promote entrepreneurship and innovation in rural communities, because it's kind of this chicken or the egg scenario where farmers need rural communities and rural communities need farmers. But to have both of those thrive, you need to have thriving economic drivers in rural communities.
And Compeer really can be that linchpin between the potential client and the programs that are being offered. They can bring it all together, so to speak.
If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't work there. To be honest about this, Compeer's mission of supporting rural, I feel strongly that we are on the forefront of the farm credit system doing this. I've run across great banks that do it. Obviously, there's people outside of lending institutions that can do a lot, and that's why we partnered with many of those. We have some really strong partnerships right now with CEDA, which is the Community Economic Development Associates out of Chatfield, Minnesota. I was just talking with them last week. A couple other groups in Minnesota. Smith is a good one based in southern Minnesota. We're expanding into Wisconsin, working with Wisconsin Extension. We're just really focused on these organizations that go beyond Compeer that can help us drive this mission for supporting the communities, not only in our territory, but we would really love to go beyond that. And so we're even part of a newly formed work group to see how we can support rural as a larger farm credit system. So we're kind of in the initial stages of this. Remember, this Rural Vitality department of our organization really only started this past year in 2023. It's been our mission for a long time, but with Jace Wagner coming in as our new CEO, it's just uncovered this entirely new way of looking at how we support rural. And honestly, I owe this new product we're launching as Compeer, our venture funding product. It has a lot to do with Jace's leadership and asking us to go above and beyond to find new ways to help people that aren't being served, particularly in rural communities and agriculture.
So, Leah, when you look at these programs, and you know that today listening are either rural entrepreneurs or real rural business people already, what would you like them to know about these programs, or what should a potential client be aware of here?
For venture funding specifically, that's my baby right now. That's my product that we're hoping is going to make a big impact for these agricultural and rural entrepreneurs. This is a project specifically designed to go from those initial sales. You have an awesome product, you've started selling it to a few people. Getting from that to a stable, growing business is really tough. So if you feel like you're in that stage of your business, if you feel like there's just not enough options, you have no idea where to get your capital, that's where we really want to come in and have a conversation. We only work with companies that somehow touch the agricultural or food supply chain. So we're not going to be interested in straight up tech companies that don't work with farmers. That's not what we do. But if it's a food product you're developing, if it's something you're trying to manufacture for use on the farm, we'd love to talk about options for financing your fixed assets. We think the best way to do that is leasing. And so I'm not going to get into all the details on what a lease is, but think of it for the sake of this conversation as just a different way to finance what you need to grow your business. If you need to put in some sort of production line, that's a physical thing that somebody needs to pay for. And not a lot of people want to pay for it today, but we would love to. We would love to help you figure out how to get that asset paid for through a lease that is hopefully lower interest than some of the crazy venture companies out there are pitching. We're not asking for a part of your company. We don't take equity stakes. We're not going to put crazy terms around it. There's not going to be crazy covenants. We're just really focused on trying to help companies in agriculture and in rural communities get from A to B.
And I'm maybe going to make you go through some of this more than once just to make sure I'm tracking properly. So are you working more with rural communities, rural businesses, or rural entrepreneurs?
All of the above in different ways. We know that this problem is bigger than any one person or one area can attack. We are trying to attack it from different angles. Venture funding is targeted specifically at rural entrepreneurs and small rural companies. And honestly, I would say go ahead and broaden that to any agricultural or food company, even if it's not necessarily in a rural community. Understanding behind that is if you're making something for the farmer, that is impacting agriculture. And we are here to serve agriculture and rural America and to increase the economic opportunities in both, and they go hand in hand. If it happens to be that you're in a larger population area making the coolest new hardware to go on a dairy farm, we're still interested. I would still love to talk to that person. Or if you're founding a really great new use for a new type of crop. Let's say somebody has a new application for Kernza, but they happen to be located in a metro adjacent area where they want to be doing production. We're still interested. Sorry, Dan, that was a long way of saying that that's how we're helping the entrepreneurs. But from the community side, we think that it's really important to work with people that have a bit more background and understanding of the communities they're working in. That's why we've partnered with others to do that. But out of our partnerships and with the people that target the communities themselves, we're doing things like putting on incubators and community venture opportunities. So the Rural Business Innovation Lab put on by CETA is one of those examples. They're actually just starting a new cohort, I think this coming month. So that is specifically for rural communities in southern Minnesota and Wisconsin at the moment. The REV program is put on by Smith. They're working with rural communities to increase their entrepreneurship throughout the entire community. So all of these things are really just trying to drive at how can we be the best partner to drive innovation? How can we be the best partner to help entrepreneurship in agriculture? We don't want to see companies fail because they can't find the funding. That should be the bottom of the totem pole. If you have a great idea, you should be able to take your business to whatever the conclusion of and size of your business is that you want to take it to. We just want to be supportive and figure out a way to help.
How does a potential client know when they're ready to have that conversation with you? That's got to be a bit of a guessing game.
It absolutely is. There's no exact number you have to hit. I could put a dollar amount on like your revenues that I want to see, but it's not really what's important. What's important is that have you found customers that really want to buy your product? And not just one or two. Have you found repeat customers? That's kind of the point that not only us as Compeer, but you as an entrepreneur should feel solid in the product that you're making. You know, we just listened to an awesome conversation with a entrepreneur that came up through a Nationally MN. And he talked about iterating and trying many different products before he found the one that really hit and spoke to customers. If you haven't gone through that process yet, you probably don't want to be taking a lot of outside capital from anyone because you don't want to get into this hole that you're still trying to figure a way out of. So if you have that product that you know is perfect and you have started selling and you have had repeat sales and you can say, yes, I have substantial revenues here, whatever substantial means to your business. And I know that I now need capital to grow. And my goal is now to grow into a profitable, stably growing business. That's when you should be talking to us.
I want to get back into the process a little bit, but I also want to remind our listeners that you're listening to the Ag Innovation News podcast presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota, or AURI. And today we're talking with Leah Thiele. She is Director of Rural Business Investment Programs at Compeer Financial. Leah, take me back to the process. Are clients working with a board or are they working one-on-one?
When you say board, that's probably not the right word because it's a team of 3 or 4 of us. I come here, you might talk to all 4 of us at some point in time, but you have one point of contact and they're going to help you walk through every step of the way. So that might be me. There's another salesperson on our team that kind of fills the same role. But then we also have a leasing specialist, somebody to look at the credit underwriting. We have somebody to help you close your lease. All of those are specialties, and so it's what they do every single day. I'm not an expert in leasing. I'm an expert in equity funding and venture companies and just ag tech more generally and the trends that we see. But we need a whole team to go through the process, but you have your point of contact to take you down that road. Does that make sense?
It does, and it makes sense to use the term team rather than board. And good point you make there. I think that people get the feeling that they're working with a group that is all pulling in the same direction rather than trying to convince a group that this is a good idea. How hands-on is Compeer start to finish? Are they in contact with that client pretty regularly?
It kind of depends on the needs of the client. There are some companies we work with, and they're like, hey, we just need to finance this one piece of equipment. We'll send you our financials. But then we just kind of want to move on with our operations and get it done. That's totally fine. We can work with that, especially if it makes sense and hits kind of our underwriting standards. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. But there's others that want to come in and explore different options. So can you not only finance what my needs, but can you help me work with what I could offer my customers? And so in that case, we've taken a couple of our customers and walked through, let's create some handouts that have your company's brand on it and now says to your customer, you can apply for a lease to buy my product. So it really just depends on the needs of the client.
And of course, you're talking about lending and investing, and there is risk involved. How are the guardrails put in place to protect not only the client, but also Compeer?
That is obviously a tricky one. It's the reason why there's not enough capital in ag tech and venture funding more generally. At Compeer, we think that we're really good at lending to farmers, which we are. We've done it for more than 100 years. But we've learned some things through that. Leasing, it's probably your least risky product. It's because of some of the laws surrounding it. So technically, Compeer does own the asset. And if something were to go wrong and we didn't get paid on time or something happened to the company, it's a little bit easier for us to come back in, get that asset, try and get it resold ourselves. That process is a little easier, which helps protect Compeer, but it actually also protects the client from a standpoint of if Compeer owns the asset, maybe I only needed this size fermentation tank for a couple of years, but I want to grow into the next size fermentation tank a couple of years down the road. Well, you aren't stuck with this size tank when you want to move to that next one. So it's kind of a good way to help both the client and to limit some of the risk on Compeer. But at the end of the day, we still have underwriting standards. We still have some terms you need to adhere to. So we are looking for clients that already have a lot of cash sitting on their balance sheet, that already have at least one equity financial partner that has put in some capital and probably could put in more capital if something went wrong in the business cycle. So we really stress that ability to make payments for at least 12 months. So cover your cash, have a cash runway of at least 12 months and ideally 18. That helps us know that we can get quite a ways down the road into the lease. And if we had to do something 18 months from now to help the cash runway from there on out of the company, or if we did have to go through a situation where we needed to resell the asset, we have a good chunk of that paid off. We're also looking at a shorter time frame. So these leases aren't going to be 7 years. They're not going to be 10 years. They're going to be more like 3 to 4. You might think, well, that doesn't help me a lot with my cash runway. But if you are looking at the alternatives, looking at getting equity from a venture capital firm, they're not going to give you 3 to 4 years of cash runway. They're going to give you 12. And if this helps extend whatever money they're going to give you, that means that you don't have to take as much of their money. You don't have to give up as much to the venture capitalists. And I think that's a win for the entrepreneurs, for the communities they sit within, because it's additional economic retention in the community. So I think it's a win all the way around.
And as you went through that explanation, it just dawned on me that Compeer is a sounding board in some sense, in that you're going to sit down with them or with me as a client, and you're going to make me walk through that process and verbalize it and maybe point out some flaws in it and how to strengthen it and the things to do better. It's another set of ears that's listening to what I'm trying to do, and it just sounds like a good way to proceed before you take on any risk.
Absolutely. We definitely want to be a sounding board. And we've run into it where we're not the right fit for capital sourcing. We're only looking at trying to help with financing hard assets, financing fixed assets. We're really not interested in the moment at financing your working capital needs. We don't want to be paying employees. But if you still need that, let's still have a conversation. We have some networks, we have connections of people that will do that if we're not the right fit, but we can still be a good part of that entire capital structure. Maybe we're 30% of your capital needs, and maybe the rest you have to get from venture capitalists or an SBA loan or grant funding. But we're very familiar with all of those pieces. And if you need help putting that together, we'd love to talk.
Well, Leah, we're getting near the end of the program, but I do want to ask how Compeer measures success in this program. How do you know when you're doing the right thing or doing it well?
If the entrepreneurs that we talk to find a way to grow their company, it's a win.
Can you share some success stories, or is there a lot of non-disclosure agreements?
There are some non-disclosure agreements. We're also pretty new into this exact type of lending. We've done some things in the past that we do think have been successful. And again, I don't want to share too many details around the companies, but even from a standpoint of making connections, giving people options to think about, helping with their ability to raise money because they've found a loan with us or a lease with Compeer, it's been really helpful, and we've had some really awesome feedback that this is definitely a needed source of capital right now.
So, how would somebody listening to this podcast and thinking they might be a good fit for the program, how do they get the process started?
I would really encourage everyone listening to this podcast to go to our website. Go to compeer.com/venture-funding. That's going to tell you a bit more information about the product. You can also email me directly at leah.thiele@compeer.com. I can get you connected with the right people, or even though I probably am the person you want to talk to first. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, so feel free to send a message there as well.
Perfect. And I was going to ask you where we could go to get more information, but I would guess it's the website or your email address. So if you give those two one more time, we'll wrap things up.
Compeer.com/venture-funding, or email me directly at leah.thiele@compeer.com.
Leah Thiele, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Dan.
We've been visiting with Leah Thiele. She's Director of Rural Business Investment Program at Compeer Financial. I want to thank her for joining us today, and thank you for listening to the Ag Innovation News Podcast, presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. I want to thank my podcast crew of one, Lisa Martinez, AURI Communications Manager and Editor of this production. To learn more about work at AURI, go to auri.org.